Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Science Guide. I'm so glad you found your way here tonight. Maybe your day was long and your thoughts are still spinning. Or maybe you're someone who prefers to drift off thinking about the mysteries hidden inside your own mind rather than counting backward from 100. Either way, this journey is for you. You don't need to do anything right now except rest. Let your shoulders drop. Let your breathing slow and deepen. Let the weight of the day begin to lift as if it's gently floating away into the darkness. Tonight, we're going to explore something both familiar and strange. Something so close to you that you've never been without it, yet so hidden that you might go your whole life without noticing its quiet power. We're going to wander through the landscape of the human mind. Not the part you're aware of, the thoughts you think deliberately, the decisions you make with careful consideration, but the other part, the vast, silent part, the part that works in shadows, that fills in blanks you didn't know were there, that whispers suggestions you believe are your own, that paints the world in colors shaped by feelings you can't quite name. Your mind is not a camera. It's not recording reality as it truly is. It's something far stranger and more creative than that. It's an artist, a storyteller, a builder. And right now, even as you're settling into this moment, it's quietly constructing your experience of the world, one invisible brushstroke at a time. Before we begin this slow drift through the hidden corridors of consciousness, if explorations like this help you unwind at the end of your day, or if they give you something gentle to think about as sleep arrives, I'd be grateful if you'd consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It helps others find these quiet journeys too, one sleepy mind at a time. And I'm curious, where did you first hear about this video? Was it recommended by a friend? Did it appear in your feed? Or did you stumble upon it while searching for something to help you sleep? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear how you found your way here. Now, let's begin. Let the night grow quiet around you, and let your mind, for once, become aware of itself. There's something different about the way your mind works at night. You've probably noticed it, even if you've never put it into words. During the day, your thoughts march forward with purpose. They're structured, filtered, organized into neat categories. You're on task. You're solving problems. You're presenting a version of yourself to the world. And your conscious mind works hard to maintain that presentation. But when the sun sets and the day's demands begin to fade, something shifts. The filters start to loosen. The boundaries between ideas become softer. Thoughts that wouldn't have connected during the bright alertness of morning now find each other in the dim hallways of evening. Memories surface that you hadn't invited. Feelings arrive without warning. Your mind, freed from the rigid structure of productivity, begins to wander. This isn't laziness. It's not your brain shutting down. It's something closer to the opposite. When you're tired, when your conscious control begins to relax its grip, deeper processes emerge. The parts of your mind that usually work in silence, hidden behind the curtain of awareness, start to show themselves. And in that soft twilight state between waking and sleeping, you begin to think differently. Scientists have found that fatigue doesn't just make you slower, it changes the very nature of your cognition. When you're tired, your mind becomes less rigid, less bound by the usual rules of logic and association. Ideas that seem unrelated during the day suddenly connect. Solutions to problems that eluded you for hours appear effortlessly. It's as if tiredness removes the scaffolding of conscious thought and reveals the more fluid, more creative architecture underneath. This is why so many breakthroughs happen, not at desks, but in beds, not during focused work, but during the hazy minutes before sleep. Friedrich August Kekulé discovered the ring structure of benzene after a dream. Dmitry Mendeleev saw the periodic table of elements arranged perfectly in his sleep. Otto Loewi woke in the middle of the night with the insight that would win him a Nobel Prize. These weren't accidents. They were glimpses of what the mind can do when conscious effort steps aside. Right now, as you listen to this, your mind is already beginning that shift. The sharp edges of daytime thinking are softening. Your awareness is becoming more diffuse, more receptive, and in this state, you're perfectly positioned to explore something fascinating. How much of what you experience as reality is actually constructed by processes you're completely unaware of? How much of the world you see, the decisions you make, the feelings you feel, are shaped by mechanisms working silently in the background without your permission, without your knowledge? Let's start with something simple. Something you do every moment of every day without ever thinking about it. Something so fundamental that if it stopped, your entire sense of the world would collapse. Right now, you're seeing. Maybe you're looking at a screen, or maybe your eyes are closed and you're seeing only the shifting patterns behind your eyelids. Either way, you assume that what you're seeing is real, that it's out there, independent of you, and your eyes are simply capturing it like a camera captures light. But that's not how it works. Not even close. Your eyes don't record the world. They sample it. And they don't even sample it very well. Most of your visual field is a blur. Only a tiny spot at the center of your vision, the fovea, sees clearly. The rest is vague, indistinct, barely more than shapes and movement. And even that central spot of clarity can only focus on one thing at a time. So how is it that you feel like you see everything clearly? How is it that when you look around a room, you have the impression of seeing the entire space in rich, sharp detail? Because your brain is lying to you, or rather, it's creating a story. It's filling in the blanks. Your visual system takes the fragmentary, blurry information it receives from your eyes and constructs a coherent picture. It uses memory. It uses expectations. It uses context. It guesses. And it does this so quickly, so seamlessly, that you never notice the construction process. You only see the finished product. This isn't a flaw, it's a feature. Your brain evolved to be efficient, not accurate. It doesn't need to process every detail of every scene. That would take too much energy, too much time. Instead, it takes shortcuts. It fills in what it expects to see based on what it has seen before. And most of the time, those expectations are right. Most of the time, the story your brain tells matches reality closely enough that you can function. But sometimes, the story is wrong. And when it's wrong, strange things happen. There's a phenomenon called change blindness. In experiments, researchers show people images or videos and make obvious changes, sometimes enormous changes, while the person is watching. They swap one object for another. They change the color of a wall. They even replace one person with a completely different person. And the viewers don't notice, not because they're not paying attention, but because their brains don't register the change as important. The brain story of the scene remains stable, and the contradiction between the story and the new information is simply smoothed over. In one famous study, a researcher approached strangers on a college campus to ask for directions. While the stranger was giving directions, two people carrying a large door walked between them, momentarily blocking their view of each other. During that brief moment, the researcher was replaced by a completely different person. Someone with a different face, different clothes, different voice, more than half of the people giving directions didn't notice. They kept talking, offering helpful suggestions, completely unaware that the person they were talking to had changed. This happens because your perception is not a bottom-up process. It's not just about what comes in through your senses, it's also, perhaps even primarily, about what your brain expects to see. Your mind builds a model of reality and updates that model only when something demands attention, when something breaks the pattern dramatically enough to require revision. Otherwise, the model stays stable, and you remain inside it, assuming it's the world itself. This is true not just for vision, but for every sense. Your hearing fills in gaps in conversation, reconstructing words you didn't actually hear based on context. Your sense of touch smooths over interruptions in sensation, creating the illusion of continuous contact. Your brain even fills in your blind spot, the place where your optic nerve attaches to your retina, and there are no light-sensing cells. You're not aware of this blank space in your vision because your visual system paints over it, borrowing information from the surrounding area and pretending that you saw it all along. You are not experiencing reality directly. You're experiencing a simulation, a best guess, a story your brain is telling you based on incomplete data and a lifetime of prior experience. And this story, though mostly reliable, is also profoundly shaped by invisible processes, by what you've seen before, by what you expect to see now, by what your brain believes is most likely to be true. This isn't cause for alarm. It's simply the way perception works. But it's worth sitting with for a moment. This strange truth that the world you see is not the world as it is. It's the world as your mind has constructed it. And that construction happens without you, quietly, constantly, outside the reach of your conscious awareness. If your conscious mind is a spotlight illuminating one small area at a time, then your unconscious mind is the vast dark space surrounding that light. And in that darkness, things are happening constantly. For a long time, the unconscious mind was associated mostly with Sigmund Freud, with dreams and repressed desires and psychoanalytic couches. And for a long time, many scientists dismissed it as unfalsifiable speculation, something that couldn't be measured or tested. But in recent decades, that has changed. The unconscious has been brought into the lab, not as a repository of hidden trauma, but as a pervasive influence on almost everything you do. Studies on priming have revealed just how much your behavior can be shaped by stimuli you're barely aware of. In one classic experiment, college students were exposed to words associated with old age. Words like Florida, gray, bingo, wrinkle. The students weren't told what the words had in common, and they weren't asked to think about aging. They just saw the words briefly as part of an unrelated task. Afterward, researchers timed how long it took the students to walk down a hallway. Those who had been primed with elderly-related words walked more slowly than those who hadn't. Not because they consciously decided to walk slowly, but because the concept of old age had been activated in their minds, and that activation subtly influenced their behavior. This isn't an isolated finding. Priming works with all kinds of associations. Show people images related to libraries, and they speak more quietly afterward. Prime them with words related to achievement, and they persist longer on difficult tasks. Expose them to the concept of money, and they become less helpful to others. None of these effects require conscious awareness. The stimuli work their influence silently, shaping behavior from behind the scenes. And it's not just external primes. Your own body influences your mind in ways you don't notice. Studies on embodied cognition have shown that physical actions can trigger corresponding psychological states. When people are asked to hold a pencil in their teeth, activating their smile muscles, they find cartoons funnier than people who hold the pencil with their lips, activating frown muscles. The physical act of smiling, even when it's not genuine, creates a feedback loop that influences emotional judgment. Similarly, holding a warm cup of coffee makes people judge others as more warm and friendly, while holding a cold drink makes them seem more distant and aloof. The weight of a clipboard influences how seriously people take a survey. The texture of a surface they're touching affects their willingness to negotiate. These are not metaphors. They're measurable effects documented in controlled studies showing that your mind is constantly influenced by sensory information that never reaches conscious thought. Your environment whispers to you constantly. The colors around you, the sounds in the background, the temperature of the room, the smell in the air, all of these send signals to your brain, and your brain responds, adjusting your mood, your energy, your openness, your willingness to trust. You think you're making decisions based on reason, on deliberate thought, but underneath that reasoning, invisible currents are pushing you one way or another. And it goes deeper still. Your brain doesn't just respond to what's around you now. It's also responding to everything that's ever been around you, every experience you've had, every person you've known, every story you've heard. All of it is stored somewhere in the vast network of your memory. And even when you're not consciously remembering, those stored experiences are shaping how you perceive the present. This is why two people can witness the same event and walk away with completely different accounts. It's not that one of them is lying. It's that their prior experiences, their expectations, their unconscious associations, all filtered the event differently. Memory is not a recording. It's a reconstruction. And every reconstruction is influenced by everything that came before. Your mind is not a blank slate responding to the world. It's a living, layered structure built from years of experience, constantly filtering the present through the past. And most of that filtering happens outside your awareness. It happens in the quiet, in the spaces between thoughts, in the moments when you're not paying attention. The world you experience is not just out there. It's also in here, built from invisible processes, shaped by whispers you don't hear. Memory feels solid. When you remember something, especially something vivid, something emotional, it feels real. It feels true. You can see it in your mind, hear the voices, feel the emotions. It's not a vague impression. It's a full experience. And because it feels so real, you trust it. But memory is not a vault. It's not a place where perfect copies of the past sit waiting to be retrieved. It's a reconstruction, a creative act, something your brain builds fresh every time you remember. And that means it can be wrong. Not just in small details, but in fundamental ways. You can remember events that never happened. You can remember yourself doing things you never did. You can remember feelings you never felt. And these false memories can be just as vivid, just as convincing as real ones. This isn't a rare occurrence. It's a feature of how memory works. In a famous series of studies, researchers were able to implant false memories in a significant percentage of participants. They would tell people, often with the help of family members, about an event that supposedly happened in their childhood. Getting lost in a shopping mall, for instance, or spilling punch at a wedding, events that never actually happened. At first, people would say they didn't remember, but when asked to try harder, to imagine what it might have been like, many of them began to develop memories. Within a few sessions, they had detailed, emotional recollections of events that were completely fabricated. This happens because memory is constructed from fragments. When you try to remember something, your brain pulls together pieces of related experiences, emotions, sensory details, and weaves them into a coherent narrative. If some of those pieces come from imagination rather than experience, your brain doesn't necessarily know the difference. It just builds the story. And once the story is built, it feels like a memory. Emotion makes this process even more powerful. Emotional memories feel more vivid, more certain than neutral ones. And that vividness creates confidence. You believe the memory more strongly because it feels more real. But vividness is not the same as accuracy. Research has shown that people's memories of highly emotional events, so-called flashbulb memories, are just as prone to error as any other kind of memory. People remember where they were when they heard about major historical events like the September 11th attacks or the Challenger explosion with great confidence. But when researchers compare those memories to accounts people gave shortly after the event, they find significant discrepancies. Details change, entire elements of the story shift, yet people remain convinced that their current memory is accurate. Because emotional intensity stamps a memory as important. It marks it as something worth preserving, but it doesn't protect the memory from distortion. If anything, emotion can make distortion more likely. When you recall an emotional memory, you're not just remembering the event, you're also remembering how you felt. And those feelings, intense and persuasive, can override contradictory details. Your brain smooths over inconsistencies, filling in gaps with what feels right rather than what actually happened. Sleep plays a strange role in this process. During sleep, especially during REM sleep, your brain consolidates memories, strengthening certain connections and weakening others. This is usually helpful. It allows important information to be preserved while less relevant details fade away. But it can also create false memories. Studies have shown that sleep increases false memory recall in certain tasks. When people are given lists of related words and then asked to recall them after sleeping, they're more likely to remember words that weren't on the list but fit the theme. Their brains during sleep extract the gist of the information and sometimes confuse that gist with specific details. The memory becomes more about the general meaning than the exact experience. This isn't a bug. It's how your brain organizes information. It looks for patterns, for connections, for the deeper structure beneath the surface. And in doing so, it sometimes sacrifices precision for coherence. It builds a story that makes sense, even if that story isn't entirely true. Forgetting, too, is not just a failure. It's an active process, one that serves a purpose. If you remembered everything, your mind would be cluttered with irrelevant details, unable to distinguish what matters from what doesn't. Forgetting allows you to let go of the trivial, the redundant, the no longer useful. It clears space for new learning, new experiences, but it also means that your past is not a stable foundation you can always return to. It's fluid, shaped by the present, by your current emotions, by the stories you tell yourself about who you are. Every time you remember, you're not just accessing the past, you're rewriting it. And this has profound implications. It means that the person you think you were, the experiences you believe shaped you, the lessons you think you learned, all of these are, to some degree, constructions. Not lies exactly, but interpretations. Stories your mind has told itself over and over until they became solidified into something that feels like truth. You carry your past with you, but the past you carry is not the past that happened. It's the past as you've rebuilt it, filtered through time, through emotion, through the needs of the present moment. And that rebuilt past, however inaccurate, shapes who you are now. Sleep is often thought of as rest, a pause. The time when your body and brain shut down to recover from the demands of the day. But that's not quite right. Sleep is not passive. It's not an absence of activity. It's a different kind of activity, one with its own purposes, its own strange logic. When you fall asleep, your conscious mind steps aside, but the rest of your brain doesn't stop. It shifts into a different mode, one where the usual rules don't apply. Connections that would never form during waking thought suddenly link together. Memories that seem unrelated play out in sequence. Ideas that your conscious mind would dismiss as irrelevant or impossible find space to exist. This is especially true during REM sleep, the stage marked by rapid eye movements and vivid dreams. During REM, the brain's chemistry changes. Levels of neurotransmitters like norepinephrine and serotonin drop, while acetylcholine remains high. This combination weakens the usual constraints on thought. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for logical reasoning and executive control, becomes less active. Meanwhile, the limbic system, the emotional center, remains highly engaged. The result is a state where associations flow freely, unconstrained by logic or plausibility. In dreams, you can fly. You can meet people who have been dead for years. You can find yourself in places that don't exist, doing things that make no sense, and it all feels perfectly normal. Because the part of your brain that would normally say, "Wait, this doesn't make sense," is quiet. But this isn't just randomness. Research suggests that REM sleep plays a crucial role in creative problem solving. The free-flowing associations, the weakened logical constraints allow your brain to explore connections it would never consider while awake. And sometimes, those connections lead to insights. Studies have shown that people who get REM sleep between learning a problem and attempting to solve it perform significantly better than those who stay awake or who only get non-REM sleep. In one experiment, participants were given word puzzles in the morning and then allowed to nap. Those who achieved REM sleep during their nap showed a nearly 40% improvement on related puzzles later that afternoon, compared to those who rested quietly or only entered non-REM sleep. The REM sleepers weren't just more rested, they were more creative. Their brains had formed new associations between ideas that seemed unrelated, and those associations helped them see solutions they had missed before. This doesn't require effort. It happens automatically. While you sleep, your brain replays the events of the day, sorting through what you've learned, finding patterns, integrating new information with old. And in the process, it sometimes stumbles on something new, something your waking mind never would have found. Even the earliest stage of sleep, the hypnagogic state, that strange twilight between waking and sleeping, has been linked to creativity. Scientists have found that spending just a few seconds in this state can triple the likelihood of having a creative insight on a previously attempted problem. Thomas Edison famously used this state to generate ideas. He would sit in a chair holding a heavy ball. As he drifted into sleep, his hand would relax, the ball would drop, and the noise would wake him. Then he would immediately write down whatever thoughts had come to him in that brief, liminal moment. There's something about that in-between state, when the conscious mind has loosened its grip but hasn't fully let go, that allows the mind to wander in particularly productive ways. The usual boundaries between categories dissolve. Ideas that belong in separate mental compartments drift toward each other. Associations form that would be dismissed as nonsense in full wakefulness, but that, in this softer state, reveals surprising connections. Your tired mind, your dreaming mind, your drifting off to sleep mind, these are not inferior versions of your daytime consciousness. They're different tools suited to different tasks. And one of those tasks is finding new ways to think. So when you lie down tonight and feel your thoughts starting to scatter, when you notice ideas connecting in strange ways, when you catch yourself thinking something that doesn't quite make sense, don't fight it. That's your mind doing what it's designed to do. It's exploring, it's recombining. It's building new structures from old materials. And tomorrow, you might wake up with an answer to a question you didn't even know you were asking. You're not alone in your head. Even when you're by yourself, even when no one else is around, you're shaped by others, by the people you've known, the people you've seen, the people you've only imagined. Human minds are fundamentally social. They evolved not in isolation, but in groups. And that social nature runs deeper than you might think. There's a class of neurons in your brain called mirror neurons. They were first discovered in monkeys, but humans have them too. These neurons fire not only when you perform an action, but also when you watch someone else perform the same action. When you see someone smile, the same neurons activate in your brain that would activate if you were smiling. When you see someone in pain, your pain-related neural circuits light up. This is the neurological basis for empathy. It's why watching someone get hurt makes you wince. It's why seeing someone cry can make you tear up. It's not just an emotional response. It's your brain simulating their experience, running a version of it in your own neural circuits so that you can, in a limited but real way, feel what they feel. And this doesn't stop at emotions. It extends to actions, to intentions, to moods. When you're around someone who's anxious, you tend to become more anxious. When you're with someone who's calm, you tend to calm down. This isn't conscious mimicry. It's automatic, involuntary, a kind of emotional contagion that spreads without anyone deciding to spread it. Studies have shown that people unconsciously mimic the facial expressions, postures, and mannerisms of those around them. And this mimicry creates connection. When two people are subtly mirroring each other, they report feeling more rapport, more understanding, more trust. The physical synchrony creates psychological synchrony. This extends to group behavior. When people move together, marching in step or singing in unison, they feel more bonded, more cooperative, more willing to help each other. Even if they've never met before, the simple act of synchronized movement creates a sense of shared identity. This is why music and dance have been part of human culture for as long as we have records. They're not just entertainment. They're technologies for creating social cohesion, for binding individuals into a collective. Your body moves with the rhythm, and as it does, your sense of self expands to include the others moving with you. But this social influence can also work in darker ways. The presence of authority can make people do things they would never do alone. The famous Milgram experiments showed that ordinary people, when instructed by an authority figure, were willing to administer what they believed were dangerous electric shocks to another person. They didn't want to. Many of them were visibly distressed. But the pressure of the situation, the presence of someone in a position of power telling them to continue, was enough to override their personal moral judgment. And it's not just authority. The behavior of the crowd matters too. When you see other people littering, you're more likely to litter. When you see others breaking small rules, you're more likely to break them too. Not because you've consciously decided that littering is okay, but because the behavior of those around you changes what feels normal, what feels acceptable. This is change blindness on a social scale. Your sense of what's right, what's expected, what's normal shifts in response to the environment without you noticing. The invisible norms of the group seep into your mind and reshape your judgments. You think of yourself as an individual, as someone who makes choices based on your own values and beliefs. And to a degree, that's true. but you're also always part of a social web. Your thoughts are influenced by the people around you, by the culture you live in, by the invisible currents of expectation and norms that flow through every interaction. This isn't weakness, it's adaptation. Humans survived not because we were the strongest or the fastest, but because we cooperated. And cooperation requires sensitivity to others, a willingness to align, to adjust, to shape ourselves to fit the group. That sensitivity is still with you, embedded in the architecture of your brain, quietly tuning your behavior to match those around you. Even now, as you listen to this, your mind is responding not just to the words, but to the voice, the rhythm, the implied presence of another consciousness. You're not just receiving information, you're engaging in a kind of social exchange, even though it's one-sided, even though I can't hear you back. Your brain treats this as a conversation, and it adjusts accordingly, slowing down, softening, opening to the possibility of connection. You are never entirely alone. The people you've known, the people you've seen, the people you've imagined, they all live on in your mind, shaping how you think, how you feel, how you see the world. The boundaries between you and others are more porous than you realize. And in those porous spaces, influence flows. For a long time, scientists believed that the brain was relatively fixed, that you were born with a certain number of neurons arranged in a certain way, and that this basic structure didn't change much over the course of your life. You could learn new things, form new memories, but the underlying hardware remained the same. That view has been overturned. The brain is not fixed. It's plastic, constantly reshaping itself in response to experience. This process, called neuroplasticity, continues throughout your life, though it slows as you age. Every time you learn something new, every time you practice a skill, every time you think a thought repeatedly, your brain changes. Neurons that fire together, wire together. This is the fundamental principle of neuroplasticity. When two neurons are activated at the same time, the connection between them strengthens. And the more often they fire together, the stronger that connection becomes. Over time, pathways that are used frequently become more efficient, more automatic. This is how habits form. This is how skills become second nature. But it also means that patterns of thought can become ingrained. If you repeatedly think anxious thoughts, the neural pathways associated with anxiety become stronger. If you habitually focus on negative interpretations, those interpretations become easier to generate, more automatic. Your brain doesn't distinguish between healthy and unhealthy patterns. It just reinforces whatever you practice. This is why breaking a habit is hard. It's not just a matter of willpower. It's a matter of rewiring. The old pathway is still there, strong and efficient, waiting to be activated. The new pathway, the one you're trying to build, is weak, unfamiliar, requiring conscious effort. It takes time and repetition for the new pathway to become strong enough to compete with the old one. But the good news is that it can happen. The brain is not locked into old patterns. With enough practice, with enough repetition, new pathways can form, old ones can weaken. This is the basis of every form of learning, every form of therapy that aims to change thought patterns. You are not stuck with the brain you have. You can, to a degree, shape it. This has profound implications. It means that the mind you have now is not inevitable. It's the product of a lifetime of experiences, of choices, of habits, of environments. And while you can't change the past, you can change the present. You can, through deliberate practice, through mindful attention, begin to rewire the patterns that no longer serve you. This doesn't happen overnight. The brain changes slowly, incrementally, in response to consistent input. But it does change. Monks who spend years meditating show measurable differences in brain structure compared to non-meditators. Musicians who practice for thousands of hours develop enlarged areas of the brain associated with motor control and auditory processing. London taxi drivers, who must memorize the entire layout of the city, have larger hippocampi than average. These aren't innate differences, they're the result of experience. The brain molds itself to fit the demands placed on it. And this means that the life you live, the things you do repeatedly, the thoughts you think over and over, all of these are sculpting your brain, shaping its structure, determining how it will function in the future. You are not a passive recipient of your own mind. You are, in a quiet, ongoing way, its creator. Every moment of attention, every choice to focus on one thing rather than another, every decision to practice patience or give in to frustration, all of these are votes, tiny but cumulative, for the kind of brain you will have. This is both empowering and humbling. Empowering because it means change is possible. Humbling because it means you are responsible, at least in part, for the mind you've built. Not in a blaming way. You didn't choose your early environment, your genetics, the events that shaped you. But going forward, you have some degree of influence. Not total control, but influence. And that influence, exercised consistently over time, can lead to real change. Not dramatic transformation, not overnight, but slow, gradual shifts in the patterns that define your inner life. The anxious mind can become calmer. The reactive mind can become more thoughtful. The closed mind can become more open. It requires patience. It requires practice. But it's possible. Because your brain, for all its complexity, is not static. It's alive, responsive, constantly rewriting itself in response to what you do. And right now, as you rest here, as you let these ideas wash over you without strain, your brain is already working, making connections, strengthening pathways, quietly reshaping itself in ways you won't notice until much later, if at all. There's a peculiar thing about the human brain. It loves efficiency. It's constantly looking for ways to conserve energy, to automate processes, to turn effortful actions into smooth, unconscious routines. This is a gift and a curse. When you first learn to drive a car, every movement requires intense concentration. You think about your hands on the wheel, your foot on the pedal, checking mirrors, judging distances. It's exhausting. But over time, something shifts. The movements become automatic. You can drive while having a conversation, while thinking about something completely unrelated. Your conscious mind is elsewhere, but your body knows what to do. The pattern has been encoded. The habit has formed. This happens through a process called synaptic strengthening. Each time you perform an action, each time a specific sequence of neurons fires in a specific pattern, the connections between those neurons become slightly more efficient. The electrical signal travels a little faster. The chemical messengers are released more readily. With enough repetition, the pathway becomes so well established that it can operate almost entirely on autopilot. Researchers have found that habits form in a specific part of the brain called the basal ganglia, a deep structure involved in movement control and procedural memory. When you're learning something new, your prefrontal cortex, the conscious decision-making part of your brain, is highly active. It's deliberating, planning, monitoring. But as the behavior becomes habitual, activity shifts from the prefrontal cortex to the basal ganglia. The action moves from conscious control to automatic routine. This is why habits are so powerful. Once formed, They require almost no conscious effort. They're triggered automatically by environmental cues, by specific contexts, by patterns your brain has learned to recognize. You walk into your kitchen in the morning and your hand reaches for the coffee pot without you deciding to do it. You get in your car and your seatbelt clicks into place before you've consciously thought about safety. These are not deliberate actions. They're automated sequences running on patterns carved deep into your neural architecture. And this is where things get interesting, because the same mechanism that makes good habits effortless also makes bad habits incredibly difficult to break. If you've spent years reaching for your phone every time you feel bored, that pattern is deeply encoded. The neural pathway is a highway, smooth and fast and efficient, and your brain, always seeking the path of least resistance, will default to that highway even when you consciously want to take a different route. Breaking a habit, then, is not just about willpower. It's about rewiring. It's about building a new neural pathway strong enough to compete with the old one. And that takes time, repetition, and patience. The new pathway starts as a faint trail, barely visible. Every time you choose the new behavior instead of the old one, you're walking that trail, making it a little bit clearer, a little bit easier to find. Eventually, with enough repetition, the new pathway becomes the default. The new habit replaces the old one. But there's something else at play here, something subtler and more fascinating. Habits don't exist in isolation. They're part of larger patterns, interconnected webs of behavior, emotion, and context. Researchers call these habit loops. Each loop has three components: a cue, something in the environment that triggers the behavior; a routine, the behavior itself; and a reward, the positive feeling or outcome that reinforces the pattern. Understanding these loops is crucial for changing behavior, because you can't just stop a habit. You have to replace it. You need to identify the cue that triggers the unwanted behavior, and then consciously substitute a new routine that provides a similar reward. The cue and the reward stay the same. Only the middle part, the routine, changes. For instance, if you have a habit of snacking when you're stressed, the cue is the feeling of stress, and the reward might be the momentary distraction or comfort the food provides. To change the habit, you don't try to eliminate stress. Instead, you find a different routine that provides the same kind of relief. Maybe a short walk, maybe deep breathing, maybe calling a friend. The new routine must satisfy the same underlying need, or your brain won't accept it as a substitute. This is why self-awareness is so important. You can't rewire a pattern you don't understand. You need to notice the cues, recognize the routines, identify the rewards, and this requires stepping back from the autopilot, becoming conscious of what was previously unconscious. But here's the beautiful part. Once you understand how habits work, once you see the mechanisms at play, you have power. Not absolute power, not instant transformation, but influence. The ability to nudge your brain in new directions, to build new pathways, to slowly reshape the patterns that shape your life. Every small choice adds up. Every time you pause before reacting, every time you choose the harder but healthier option, every time you practice awareness instead of autopilot, you're strengthening new neural pathways. You're teaching your brain that this new way is possible. And with enough practice, that new way becomes easier. It becomes natural. It becomes who you are. There's a strange loop in the relationship between your body and your mind. You assume that your mind controls your body, that your thoughts and feelings drive your physical state, and that's partly true. But the influence flows both ways, often in ways you're completely unaware of. When you smile, even if you don't feel happy, even if the smile is forced or fake, your brain receives feedback from the muscles in your face, and that feedback influences your emotional state. Studies have shown that people who hold a pencil in their teeth, forcing their face into a smile-like expression, find cartoons funnier than people who hold the pencil with their lips, forcing a frown-like expression. The physical position of the face creates a psychological shift. This is called the facial feedback hypothesis, and it's just one example of embodied cognition. The idea that your mental states are deeply influenced by your physical states. Your body is not just a vessel for your mind, it's part of the thinking process itself. Posture affects mood. When people sit in an upright, open position, they report feeling more confident and positive. When they slouch or curl in on themselves, they feel more dejected. This isn't just perception. Physiological markers change too. Hormone levels shift. Cortisol, the stress hormone, decreases with expansive postures and increases with closed, contracted positions. Temperature affects judgment. When you hold a warm cup of coffee, you're more likely to perceive people as warm and trustworthy. When you hold a cold drink, you judge them as more distant and unfriendly. The physical sensation of warmth activates neural networks associated with interpersonal warmth, and your mind confuses the two. Weight affects importance. When people hold a heavy clipboard while reading information, they judge that information as more serious and significant than when they hold a light clipboard. The physical weight creates a metaphorical sense of weightiness, of importance. These effects are subtle, but they're real, and they're happening all the time without your awareness. Your environment, your physical state, your body's position and sensations, all of these are constantly feeding information to your brain, shaping your thoughts, influencing your emotions, guiding your decisions. This creates a peculiar situation. You think you're making choices based on reason, on deliberate thoughts, but beneath that reasoning, your body is whispering suggestions. The room is warm, so you feel more trusting. You're standing tall, so you feel more confident. You just had a good meal, so you're more generous. None of these influences are conscious. None of them feel like influences at all. They just quietly tilt the scales one way or another. And this extends to movement as well. When you move in sync with others, when you walk in step or clap in rhythm or sing together, your sense of self expands. The boundaries between you and them become more porous. You feel more connected, more cooperative, more willing to help. This is why armies march in unison, why choirs sing together, why rituals often involve synchronized movement. It's a technology for creating social cohesion, for binding individuals into a collective. Your brain evolved in a body, and that body's primary purpose for millions of years was movement through a physical and social world. Your thoughts didn't evolve in isolation. They evolved embedded in flesh, shaped by sensations, influenced by the continuous feedback loop between action and perception. So when you want to change how you feel, sometimes the most direct route isn't through your thoughts, it's through your body. Stand taller, and you might feel braver. Slow your breath, and you might feel calmer. Smile, even if you don't feel like it, and the feeling might follow. This isn't about faking it. It's about recognizing that the mind and body are not separate. They're one integrated system, and the influence flows in both directions. Your thoughts shape your body. Yes, but your body also shapes your thoughts. And in that bi-directional flow, there's room for change, for intervention, for using one lever to move another. Right now, notice your body, the weight of it, against whatever you're resting on. The rhythm of your breath, slow and steady. The softness in your face, the release in your shoulders. These aren't just physical sensations. They're sending signals to your brain. Signals of safety, of rest, of permission to let go. And your mind, receiving those signals, begins to soften too. You don't need to think your way into relaxation. Sometimes you just need to breathe your way there, to let your body lead and allow your mind to follow. Time is not what you think it is. Not subjectively anyway. Objectively, seconds tick by at a constant rate. But inside your mind, time stretches and compresses, speeds up and slows down, depending on what you're paying attention to. When you're engaged in something fascinating, hours can pass in what feels like minutes. When you're bored or anxious, minutes can feel like hours. This isn't just perception. It's a fundamental feature of how your brain constructs your experience of time. Your sense of time passing is closely linked to the density of your memories. When you're in a novel situation, experiencing new things, your brain is encoding lots of information. Each moment is rich with detail. And when you look back on that period later, it feels like it lasted a long time because there's so much memory to recall. But when you're in familiar routines, doing the same things you've done 1,000 times before, your brain doesn't bother encoding much. The moments blur together. And when you look back, the time feels compressed, like it disappeared. This is why childhood seems to last forever, and adulthood speeds by. As a child, everything is new. As an adult, much is routine. This has profound implications. If you want to slow down your subjective experience of time, you need to seek novelty. You need to break routines, try new things, pay attention to details you usually ignore. The more you notice, the more your brain encodes. The more it encodes, the richer your memory. And the richer your memory, the longer that time will feel when you look back on it. But there's another dimension to this. Your perception of time in the moment is also shaped by attention. When you're fully absorbed in what you're doing, when your attention is completely engaged, you enter a state that psychologists call flow. In flow, the sense of time passing disappears entirely. You're so immersed in the activity that there's no space left for self-awareness, no mental bandwidth for monitoring the clock. You just are doing, fully present. This state is associated with deep satisfaction, with a sense of meaning and fulfillment. People describe flow experiences as some of the best moments of their lives, not because they're pleasurable in a hedonic sense, but because they're meaningful. Because in those moments, the usual gap between self and world collapses. You're not thinking about doing, you're just doing. And this brings us to attention itself, perhaps the most valuable resource you have. Your attention is limited. At any given moment, you can focus on only a small sliver of the world around you. And what you choose to focus on shapes your reality more than almost anything else. If you focus on threats, on problems, on what's wrong, that becomes your world. Not because nothing is right, but because your attention has filtered out everything else. The good things are still there. You're just not looking at them. If you focus on gratitude, on small pleasures, on moments of connection, those expand, not because they weren't there before, but because you're noticing them now. Attention doesn't just observe reality, it constructs it, selecting certain elements and ignoring others, building a coherent narrative from fragmentary data. This is why mindfulness practices, meditation, and other attention training techniques can be so transformative. They're not about changing what's there. They're about changing what you notice. They're about reclaiming control over your attention, training it to rest where you want it to rest, rather than being yanked around by every stimulus, every worry, every passing thought. And this training, like any training, changes your brain. People who meditate regularly show increased activity in areas associated with attention control and decreased activity in the default mode network, the brain's wandering mind circuit. They're better at focusing, better at letting go of distractions, better at noticing where their attention is and redirecting it when it drifts. This isn't mystical, it's neuroplasticity. It's the same process that makes you better at playing piano or speaking a language. You practice noticing where your attention is. You practice bringing it back when it wanders. And over time, those neural pathways strengthen. The skill improves. The world you experience is the world you attend to. And the world you attend to is, to a large degree, a choice. Not an easy choice. Not a choice you make once and forget, but a choice you make moment by moment, again and again. Each time your attention drifts and you gently guide it back. Right now, your attention is here, on these words, on the ideas flowing past. But it's also on your breath, on the sounds around you, on the feeling of your body settling into rest. You're attending to multiple things at once, some in the foreground, others in the background. And as you notice this, as you become aware of your own attention, something shifts. You're not just experiencing, you're witnessing your experience. And in that witnessing, there's a kind of freedom, a small space between stimulus and response, between what happens and how you react. That space is where choice lives, and that choice, exercised consistently over time, shapes not just individual moments, but the entire trajectory of your life. You are, right now, in the middle of a story about who you are, where you've been, where you're going. This story feels true. It feels like the simple recounting of facts, but it's not. It's an interpretation, a narrative your mind has constructed from fragments of memory, filtered through emotion, shaped by the needs of the present moment. The story you tell yourself about your life determines, to a remarkable degree, how you experience that life. Two people can go through nearly identical events and emerge with completely different stories. One person sees failure after failure, a pattern of defeat, evidence that they're not good enough. Another person sees the same events as lessons, as stepping stones, as proof of resilience. The events are the same. The story is different. And the story, not the events, shapes how they move forward. This isn't about positive thinking or delusional optimism. It's about recognizing that the past is not fixed in the way you think it is. Your memory of the past is malleable, constantly being rewritten, reinterpreted, reshaped by who you are now. And the story you build from those memories, the narrative you impose on the randomness of experience, that story becomes a kind of prophecy, a framework that guides your future actions. If you tell yourself you're someone who always gives up, you're more likely to give up, not because it's true, but because the story creates expectations, and expectations shape behavior. If you tell yourself you're someone who perseveres, who learns from mistakes, who keeps trying, then you're more likely to do exactly that. The story doesn't just describe you, it creates you. And here's the remarkable thing. You have more control over this story than you might realize. Not complete control, not the ability to rewrite the past or deny what happened, but the ability to choose what it means, to reframe, to find different themes, different patterns, different lessons. This is what therapy, at its best, often does. It helps people reauthor their life narratives, not by denying pain or pretending trauma didn't happen, but by finding new ways to understand it, new meanings to extract from it. The events stay the same, but the story changes, and with the story, the person changes too. There's research showing that the simple act of writing about difficult experiences, of putting them into narrative form, can have profound effects on mental and physical health. People who write about trauma show improved immune function, lower stress levels, better emotional regulation. The act of narrating, of making sense, of finding coherence, seems to help the mind metabolize difficult experiences. But it's not just about the past. The stories you tell yourself about the future matter too. Your expectations, your beliefs about what's possible. These shape what you attempt, how much effort you invest, how you interpret setbacks. If you believe you're capable of learning and growing, you're more likely to put in the work required. If you believe your abilities are fixed, you're more likely to give up when things get difficult. Psychologist Carol Dweck calls this the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. People with a fixed mindset believe their intelligence, their talents, their personality are set. They see challenges as threats, as opportunities to be exposed as inadequate. People with a growth mindset believe they can develop, improve, change. They see challenges as opportunities to learn. And these mindsets, these stories about the self, are self-fulfilling. The fixed mindset person avoids challenges so they don't grow. The growth mindset person embraces challenges so they do. Over time, the gap widens, not because of innate differences, but because of the stories they told themselves about who they were. Your life is not just what happens to you. It's also what you make of what happens to you. It's the story you tell, the meaning you create, the framework you impose. And that story, though it feels like a passive description, is actually an active force shaping your emotions, guiding your decisions, determining what seems possible and what seems out of reach. So, what story are you telling yourself right now about this day, this year, this life, about who you are and what you're capable of? Is it a story that opens doors or closes them? Is it a story that empowers or constrains? You don't have to accept the first draft. You can revise. You can reframe. You can find new themes, new patterns, new possibilities hidden in the same set of facts. The past is not as fixed as it seems, and the future is more open than you might believe. You are not just yourself. You're also the accumulation of everyone you've known, everyone who raised you, everyone who influenced you. Their voices echo in your mind, their values shape your judgments, their fears become your fears, their dreams become your dreams. Sometimes you can hear these voices clearly. Sometimes they become so internalized that you can no longer distinguish them from your own thoughts. Psychologists call this your internal working model, the set of expectations and beliefs about relationships, about yourself, about the world that you developed early in life based on your interactions with caregivers. These models operate largely outside awareness, shaping how you interpret social situations, how you respond to intimacy, how you handle conflict. If you grew up in an environment where emotional expression was welcomed and met with understanding, you likely learned that feelings are manageable, that connection is safe, that others can be trusted to respond with care. If you grew up in an environment where emotions were dismissed or punished, you likely learned to suppress feelings, to distrust vulnerability, to expect rejection when you reach out. These patterns, formed early, persist. They're not conscious beliefs. you can simply choose to discard. They're deep structures, encoded in neural pathways, reinforced by years of experience. They shape your automatic responses, your gut reactions, your sense of what feels normal or dangerous or comforting. But they're not unchangeable. Therapy, particularly attachment-focused therapy, works by helping people become aware of these patterns, recognize where they came from, and gradually build new ones. It's a form of neuroplasticity, rewiring the deep emotional circuitry that governs relationships. This process is not quick. It requires patience, repetition, and often the experience of a safe relationship that contradicts the old patterns. But it is possible. People who grew up with insecure attachment styles can, through intentional work and supportive relationships, develop more secure ways of relating. And it's not just about relationships with others. It's also about your relationship with yourself. The way you talk to yourself, the voice you hear in your head when you make a mistake or face a challenge. That voice is often an internalized version of how you were spoken to early in life. If you were criticized harshly, that harsh voice becomes part of your internal dialogue. If you were encouraged, supported, met with patience, that patience becomes how you treat yourself. This inner voice shapes your self-esteem, your resilience, your capacity to cope with difficulty. The good news is that you can change this voice, not by forcing yourself to think positive thoughts, but by noticing when the harsh voice speaks, recognizing that it's not the truth but a learned pattern, and consciously choosing to respond to yourself with the kindness you might show a friend. This is called self-compassion, and research shows it's one of the most powerful predictors of psychological well-being. People who are compassionate toward themselves, who treat their own suffering with the same care they'd offer others, are less anxious, less depressed, more resilient in the face of setbacks. Self-compassion doesn't mean self-indulgence or making excuses. It means recognizing that suffering is part of being human, that imperfection is universal, that you deserve kindness even when you fail, especially when you fail, because that's when you need it most. The patterns you carry from the past, the voices you've internalized, the models of relationship and self that were built before you could choose them, all of these shape your present, but they don't have to define your future. With awareness, with practice, with the courage to question old beliefs and build new patterns, you can rewrite these deep structures. It takes time. It's not easy, but it's possible. Because the mind, for all its resistance to change, is also extraordinarily capable of it. You are not doomed to repeat the past. You can learn from it, build on it, and gradually become something new. The words you use don't just describe your experience, they shape it. Language is not a neutral tool for labeling what's already there. It's an active force, structuring thought, carving categories, determining what you notice and what you ignore. Consider the simple act of naming an emotion. When you feel a complex, diffuse physiological state, tension in your chest, tension in your shoulders, a sense of unease, and you label it anxiety, that label changes the experience. It gives it coherence, a narrative, a set of associations. Anxiety has a different feel than excitement, even though the physiological symptoms are nearly identical. The word you choose determines how you relate to the feeling. Research has shown that people with a more nuanced emotional vocabulary, what psychologists call high emotional granularity, are better at regulating their emotions. They can distinguish between anxious, worried, jittery, apprehensive, and overwhelmed. And each label corresponds to a slightly different pattern of experience, a different set of possible responses. The person with low emotional granularity just feels bad, an undifferentiated discomfort that's harder to work with. This extends beyond emotion to all of experience. The language available to you determines what you can think. This is called the linguistic relativity hypothesis. And while the strong version, that language completely determines thought, has been largely rejected, the weaker version remains compelling. Language influences thought. It shapes perception. It makes certain distinctions easy and others difficult. For instance, some languages have many more words for snow than English does. Speakers of these languages don't just have more labels. They actually perceive different types of snow more readily. Their attention is drawn to distinctions that English speakers might not notice. The language creates categories, and the categories shape what the mind attends to. Similarly, the metaphors embedded in your language shape how you think about abstract concepts. If you talk about time as money, something you spend, save, or waste, you think about it differently than if you talk about it as a river, something that flows. The metaphor structures the concept, highlighting certain features and hiding others. This has practical implications. The way you talk to yourself, the language you use to describe your life, your challenges, your goals, matters. If you describe a difficult period as a setback, that implies something temporary, something you can recover from. If you describe it as proof that I'm a failure, that implies something permanent, something about your identity. Same situation, different language, completely different psychological impact. Therapists know this. Cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the most effective forms of psychotherapy, focuses heavily on identifying and changing the language people use to describe their experiences. Catastrophizing thoughts like, "This is the worst thing ever," get challenged and replaced with more accurate assessments like, "This is difficult, but I've handled difficult things before." The shift in language creates a shift in perspective, which creates a shift in emotion and behavior. You can do this yourself, outside of therapy. Pay attention to the words you use when you talk to yourself. Notice the metaphors, the absolutes, the generalizations, and when you catch yourself using language that makes things worse, gently try on different words, not to deny reality, but to describe it more accurately, more kindly, more usefully. Words create worlds. The world you live in is partly determined by the words you have for it, and the words you choose, consciously or unconsciously, shape your experience from the inside out. There is something deeply human about ritual. Not religious ritual necessarily, though that's part of it, but the simple, repeated actions that mark transitions, create structure, and give shape to time. Morning coffee made the same way every day. A bedtime routine. A walk taken at the same time. The ritual of Sunday dinner. A knock-on-wood gesture when tempting fate. These repeated actions do more than fill time. They shape the mind. They create a sense of order, of predictability, of control in a world that often feels chaotic. And that sense of order has psychological effects that go far beyond the specific action. Research has shown that rituals reduce anxiety. Even arbitrary rituals made up on the spot can have this effect. When people perform a brief ritual before a stressful task, singing a specific song or making a specific gesture, they report feeling less anxious and perform better. The ritual creates a sense of control, a feeling that they've done something to prepare, to mark the transition, to make the moment meaningful. This works partly through predictability. Your brain loves patterns. It finds comfort in knowing what comes next, and rituals provide that predictability. They're like touchstones, stable points in the flow of time, reminders that some things remain constant, even as everything else changes. But rituals do something else too. They create transitions. They mark boundaries between one state and another. A morning routine signals the shift from sleep to wakefulness, from private self to public self. A bedtime routine signals the opposite transition from day to night, from doing to resting. These transitions help your brain shift modes, moving from one set of expectations and behaviors to another. Without rituals, the day can feel formless, one long, non-differentiated stretch of time. With rituals, it has structure, beginning, middle, end, morning, afternoon, evening, work time, rest time. The rituals don't just mark these divisions, they help create them. And there's something about the repetition itself that matters. Doing the same thing over and over creates a rhythm, a sense of continuity across time. You're connecting today's self to yesterday's self, to tomorrow's self. You're creating a thread that runs through your life, linking moments into a coherent whole. This is one reason why disruptions to routine can be so disorienting. When you travel, when you move, when your schedule changes dramatically, you lose these touchstones. Time feels strange. Days blur together. You feel unmoored. It's not just that you're doing different things. It's that the rhythms that organized your experience, that gave it shape and meaning, have been disrupted. And this is also why building new routines can be so stabilizing during difficult transitions, when everything else is changing, when life feels uncertain. Establishing even small rituals, a morning walk, a cup of tea before bed, creates islands of stability. They're not solutions to the underlying problems, but they provide structure, rhythm, a sense that you have some control, some ability to shape your days, even when larger forces feel beyond your influence. Rituals and routines are not just habits, they're meaning-making practices. They're ways of saying to yourself, this transition is important. I am marking this time, claiming it, making it mine. And in that marking, in that claiming, you create a sense of agency, of intentionality, of being someone who acts rather than someone to whom things merely happen. You probably have more rituals than you realize, small repeated actions that structure your day, that signal transitions, that create a sense of order. And you can create more, deliberately, intentionally. Little touchstones to remind yourself that you're here, that you're present, that even in the midst of chaos, there are moments you can shape, rhythms you can create, meanings you can make. While you lie still in the darkness, while your body rests and your consciousness fades, your brain continues its work. Not the same work it does during the day, but something different, something stranger, something essential. Sleep is not just rest, it's active reorganization, a nightly process of consolidation, integration, and transformation. During sleep, especially during deep, slow-wave sleep and REM sleep, your brain replays the events of the day, not randomly, but selectively, strengthening some memories and letting others fade. This replay happens in fast-forward. Patterns of neural activity that occurred during learning are reactivated during sleep, compressed in time, repeated hundreds or thousands of times. With each repetition, the connections between neurons strengthen. The information moves from temporary storage in the hippocampus to more permanent storage in the cortex. What was fragile becomes stable. What was effortful becomes automatic. But sleep does more than preserve. It also transforms. During REM sleep, the brain makes new connections, linking memories in unexpected ways. This is why sleep is so important for creativity, for problem solving, for insight. When you sleep on a problem, your brain continues working on it, exploring associations, testing combinations, finding solutions that eluded your waking mind. The chemistry of REM sleep is different from waking consciousness. Stress hormones like norepinephrine drop to their lowest levels. This creates a state where emotional memories can be processed without the full intensity of the original emotion. The memory is preserved, but the sharp edges are dulled. This is part of how your mind metabolizes difficult experiences, gradually reducing their emotional charge while retaining the information. Without adequate sleep, this process is disrupted. Memories don't consolidate properly. Emotional regulation suffers. The brain doesn't get the chance to clean out cellular waste products that accumulate during waking hours, including proteins associated with neurodegeneration. Over time, chronic sleep deprivation leads to cognitive decline, mood disorders, and increased risk of various diseases. But when you sleep well, when you give your brain the time it needs to do its nightly work, you wake not just rested, but mentally sharper, emotionally more balanced, better able to learn and adapt and cope with challenges. Sleep is not wasted time. It's when some of the most important cognitive work happens. And dreams, those strange, illogical narratives that unfold in REM sleep, are not just meaningless noise. They're thought to be part of how the brain integrates new information with existing knowledge, how it tests scenarios, processes emotions, and makes sense of waking experience. The surreal quality of dreams, the impossible combinations, the emotional intensity, all of this reflects the brain working in a different mode, following different rules, exploring connections that waking logic would reject. You might not remember most of your dreams, but they're happening every night, multiple times, each one a window into the mind's nightly activity. It's ongoing work of consolidation, integration, and meaning-making. So when you lie down tonight, when you feel yourself drifting towards sleep, know that you're not just shutting down. You're shifting into a different state of being, one where your mind continues its essential work in the quiet darkness, processing the day, preparing for tomorrow, strengthening what matters, and letting go of what doesn't. The architecture of sleep is precisely tuned. Your brain cycles through different stages, each serving a different purpose. Light sleep acts as a transition, a gentle bridge between waking and deeper states. Deep slow-wave sleep, marked by large, rhythmic brain waves, is when the heaviest restoration occurs. Growth hormone is released. Cellular repair accelerates. The immune system strengthens its defenses. Then comes REM sleep, when the brain becomes almost as active as during waking, but in a fundamentally different pattern. Your eyes move rapidly beneath closed lids. Your muscles become temporarily paralyzed, preventing you from acting out your dreams. And in this state, memories are woven together, emotions are processed, and the mind rehearses scenarios, solving problems, making connections, preparing for challenges yet to come. These cycles repeat throughout the night, each lasting about 90 minutes. Early in the night, deep sleep dominates. As morning approaches, REM periods lengthen, becoming richer, more vivid, more elaborate. By dawn, your brain has traveled through multiple worlds, processed countless associations, and emerged renewed. This is why cutting sleep short, even by an hour or two, has disproportionate effects. You're not just losing time, you're losing specific stages, particular types of processing that can't be made up later. The brain needs the full cycle, the complete architecture to do its work properly. And the quality of your waking life shapes the quality of your sleep. Stress hormones that remain elevated into the evening make it harder to fall asleep, harder to stay asleep, harder to reach the deeper stages where restoration happens. Screens that emit blue light signal to your brain that it's still daytime, suppressing melatonin, the hormone that helps initiate sleep. But simple changes can help. Dimming lights in the evening, establishing a consistent sleep schedule, creating a calm transition period before bed. These aren't just sleep hygiene tips. They're ways of working with your brain's natural rhythms, of supporting the processes that happen in darkness, of giving your mind the conditions it needs to do its essential nightly work. Right now, as you rest here, your body is already preparing. Your core temperature is dropping slightly. Your breathing is slowing. Muscles are releasing tension they've held all day. These physical changes signal to your brain that it's time to shift modes, to move from the alertness of day toward the restorative darkness of night. You don't need to force it, you just need to allow it. To stop resisting, stop trying, stop holding on. Sleep is not something you do. It's something you let happen. And the more you trust the process, the more easily it arrives. Here's something strange. You are the person you know best. You've been with yourself every moment of your life. You have access to your thoughts, your feelings, your intentions in a way no one else does. And yet, in many ways, you're also the person you know least. Research has consistently shown that people are remarkably poor judges of their own abilities, their own biases, their own motivations. This isn't because people are stupid. It's because self-knowledge is surprisingly difficult to achieve. You can't see your own face without a mirror. And in a similar way, you can't see your own mind without reflection, without stepping outside yourself, without getting feedback from the world and from others. Much of what drives your behavior operates outside awareness. You don't have direct access to the processes that shape your judgments, your preferences, your emotional reactions. When researchers ask people why they made a certain choice or why they feel a certain way, people give answers. But studies have shown that these answers are often confabulations, stories constructed after the fact to explain behavior that was actually driven by unconscious processes. You think you know why you did something, but the real reasons are hidden, even from you. This is called the introspection illusion, the mistaken belief that you have direct, transparent access to the workings of your own mind. In reality, much of what your mind does is invisible to conscious introspection. You can observe the outputs, your thoughts, your feelings, your actions, but the processes that generated them remain hidden. This creates a curious situation. Other people, in some ways, might know you better than you know yourself. They can see patterns in your behavior that you're blind to. They notice when you're stressed before you do. They can predict how you'll react to certain situations based on your past behavior, even when you believe you'll act differently this time. This doesn't mean you should defer to others' judgments about who you are, but it does mean that self-knowledge requires more than introspection. It requires observation, feedback, a willingness to consider that your self-perception might be incomplete or distorted. One of the most robust findings in social psychology is that people consistently overestimate their own abilities relative to others. Most people believe they're above-average drivers, above average in their moral character. Statistically, this is impossible, but psychologically, it's nearly universal. This is called the better-than-average effect, and it reflects a fundamental bias in how we view ourselves. We see our own intentions. We know we mean well. We remember all the times we tried hard, all the obstacles we overcame, but we don't have the same access to others' internal states. We judge them by their actions, not their intentions. And so we give ourselves the benefit of the doubt in ways we don't extend to others. This creates blind spots. You might believe you're a fair person, but studies show that even people who strongly value fairness often show unconscious biases in their behavior. You might believe you're open-minded, but research suggests that everyone, regardless of their stated values, is influenced by implicit associations that operate outside awareness. Becoming aware of these blind spots doesn't mean becoming cynical about yourself. It means becoming more realistic, more humble, more willing to question your automatic assumptions. It means recognizing that self-knowledge is an ongoing project, not a state you achieve once and then possess forever. And it means being willing to sit with uncertainty, to acknowledge that you might not fully understand why you feel the way you feel, why you did what you did, who you really are beneath the stories you tell yourself. That uncertainty can be uncomfortable, but it's also honest. And from that honesty, from that willingness to not know, deeper understanding can eventually emerge. You are not a fixed entity with a clear, knowable essence. You're a process, constantly changing, constantly becoming, constantly surprising yourself. And the project of knowing yourself is not about pinning down that essence. It's about learning to observe the process with curiosity, with compassion, with a willingness to be surprised by what you find. We've traveled far tonight through perception and memory, through the unconscious influences that shape your choices, through the social web that binds you to others, through the brain's capacity to rewire itself, and the strange alchemy of sleep. We've touched on habit formation, on the role of emotion in memory, on the way language shapes thought and attention constructs reality. And yet, for all of this, we've barely scratched the surface. The mind is vast, deeper, and stranger than any single explanation can capture. For every mechanism we understand, there are dozens we don't. For every question answered, new ones emerge. We still don't know, not really, how consciousness arises from neural activity. We don't know why some experiences are remembered vividly, while others fade instantly. We don't fully understand how the brain binds together all the separate features of experience, color and sound, and texture and meaning into a single unified perception. We don't know why some people are more resilient than others, why the same trauma affects different people in such different ways. We don't know why creativity strikes when it does, why insights arrive suddenly after periods of not thinking about a problem. We don't know how to fully predict who someone will become. How much is determined by genes, and how much by environment, and how much by choices that could have gone either way. We don't know the upper limits of human potential, what the mind could become under optimal conditions. These are not failures of science. They're reminders that the mind, your mind, is not a simple machine. It's a complex, dynamic, self-organizing system, constantly adapting, constantly creating, constantly surprising even those who study it most closely. And maybe that's okay. Maybe not everything needs to be explained. Maybe there's value in sitting with the mystery, in acknowledging that you're a marvel, a strange and beautiful confluence of biology and experience, and something else, something harder to name, that makes you not just a collection of processes, but a person, a self, a consciousness, looking out at the world and wondering what it all means. You are the universe become aware of itself, atoms arranged in such a way that they can contemplate their own existence. Matter that dreams, stardust that wonders why it's here. That's remarkable, mysterious, humbling, and maybe, just maybe, that sense of mystery, that awareness that you don't fully understand yourself or the world around you, maybe that's not a problem to be solved. Maybe it's an invitation to stay curious, to keep exploring, to approach your own mind with the wonder it deserves. Because you are not finished. You're not a completed project. You're always in the process of becoming, of changing, of discovering new capacities you didn't know you had. And that process, that ongoing transformation, continues whether you notice it or not. Right now, even now, your brain is working, making connections, strengthening some pathways, letting others fade, processing the day, preparing for sleep, quietly reshaping itself in ways you won't notice until much later, if at all. And that's the final truth of this long wandering journey through the mind. You don't need to understand it all. You don't need to figure it out, to master it, to explain it. You just need to be present to it, to notice, to wonder, to let yourself be amazed by the fact of your own existence. Tomorrow when you wake, the invisible processes will continue. The mind will keep shaping reality, filling in gaps, telling stories, building the world from fragments. And you, aware of it or not, will keep creating yourself one thought, one choice, one moment at a time. For all we've learned about the mind, for all the studies and scans and carefully controlled experiments, there is still so much we don't understand. Consciousness itself, the fact that you have a subjective experience, that there is something it feels like to be you, remains one of the deepest mysteries in science. We can map the brain. We can watch neurons fire. We can identify which regions are active during specific tasks. But we still don't know how electrical activity in neurons gives rise to the felt sense of being, the awareness of awareness, the strange loop of a mind observing itself. This is sometimes called the hard problem of consciousness. It's easy, relatively speaking, to explain what the brain does, how it processes information, how it forms memories, how it generates behavior. But it's hard, perhaps impossible with our current frameworks, to explain why any of that processing is accompanied by experience, why it feels like something. Some scientists believe that consciousness is an emergent property, something that arises when information is integrated in certain complex ways. Others think it's fundamental, woven into the fabric of reality in ways we don't yet comprehend. And still others suggest that the question itself might be flawed, that we're looking for an explanation of something that doesn't require the kind of explanation we're trying to give. But whatever the answer, the mystery remains. You are here, aware, experiencing this moment, and that simple fact, the fact of your own existence as a conscious being, is stranger and more profound than anything science has fully explained. And maybe that's okay. Maybe the mind doesn't need to understand itself completely to function. Maybe some mysteries are meant to be lived with rather than solved. You don't need to know how your brain constructs perception to see. You don't need to understand memory consolidation to remember. You don't need a theory of consciousness to be conscious. You just are. Here, now, aware of these words, of your breathing, of the quiet space around you. And that awareness, however it arises, is enough. You don't have to figure it all out. You don't have to remember every detail of what you've heard tonight. In fact, it's better if you don't try. Let it all drift, the way thoughts drift when you're falling asleep. Let the ideas settle where they will, without forcing them into place. Because the mind works best when it's not gripped too tightly. When you let go, when you stop trying to control every thought, that's when the deeper processes can do their work. That's when connections form. That's when insights arrive. So let yourself drift now. Let the day fade. Let the need to understand, to analyze, to remember, all of it can wait until morning. Right now, you don't need to do anything at all. And so we arrive, gently, at the end of this quiet journey through the hidden architecture of your mind. We've wandered through perception and memory, through the unconscious influences that shape your choices. through the strange alchemy of sleep and the social web that binds you to others. We've touched on the brain's capacity to reshape itself and the mysteries that remain even after all our looking. But the truth is, you don't need to hold on to any of this. You don't need to remember the studies, the names, the details. What matters is the feeling, the quiet recognition that your mind is not what you thought it was, that it's stranger, more creative, more connected, more fluid than the simple story you've been telling yourself. You are not a fixed entity moving through a fixed world. You're a process, a becoming, a story that writes itself moment by moment. And the world you experience is not separate from you. It's woven from your perceptions, your memories, your expectations, your unconscious biases, all mixed together into something that feels solid but is actually quite soft, quite malleable. This might be unsettling, or it might be freeing. To know that reality is not as rigid as it seems, that your past is not as fixed, your future not as determined, yourself not as unchanging. There is room in all of this softness for change, for growth, for new patterns to form. But you don't need to think about that now. You don't need to plan or decide or resolve. You just need to rest. Let the ideas fade into the background. Let your thoughts become lighter, less defined, like clouds dissolving into sky. Let your body settle deeper into wherever you are, as if you're slowly sinking into warmth. There's nothing left to figure out tonight. The mind that you've been exploring, it will keep working while you sleep. It will sort and sift and connect, building new pathways, strengthening some memories and letting others drift away. It will do all of this without you. You don't have to supervise. You don't have to help. You just have to let go. And somewhere in that letting go, in the space between waking and sleeping, you might catch a glimpse of something. Not a thought, exactly. Not a memory, just a feeling. The quiet presence of your own mind, aware of itself, watching itself slip into dreams. It's a strange thing to be conscious, to be here, now, thinking about thinking. To be a process aware of its own processing. You are, in this moment, the universe looking at itself. And that's remarkable, mysterious, beautiful, but it's also exhausting. And you've done enough looking for one night. So close your eyes now if they're not already closed. Let the darkness be gentle. Let the silence be soft. Tomorrow, when you wake, the world will still be there. Your mind will still be building it, filling in the blanks, telling you stories, shaping reality in ways you'll never fully see. But tonight, let it all rest. Let the whispers go quiet. Let the invisible architects take a break. Let the mind that shapes the world simply be, without effort, without purpose. You've traveled through so much tonight, through the way your brain fills gaps you don't know are there, through memories that change each time you recall them, through the unconscious forces that nudge you one way or another without you ever noticing, through the social connections that blur the boundary between self and other, through the brain's endless capacity to rewire, to adapt, to become something new. And through it all, one truth has emerged. You are both more and less than you think you are. Less in control, less aware, less separate from the world than your conscious mind believes, but more capable, more creative, more connected than you might have imagined. The mind is not a thing you have. It's a process you are, a continuous unfolding, a stream of becoming, a dance between biology and experience that never stops, that never arrives at a final form. You are always in the middle of the story, always changing, always being shaped by forces visible and invisible. And that's okay. You don't need to understand it all. You don't need to master your mind to control every thought, to explain every feeling. You can just be with it. Notice it. Watch it work with curiosity and kindness and a touch of wonder. Because this mind of yours, for all its quirks and limitations, for all its biases and blind spots, is also miraculous. It's the tool that lets you love, create, imagine, hope. It's what makes you capable of noticing a sunset, remembering a kindness, anticipating joy. It's what allows you to read these words, to follow these ideas, to drift gently towards sleep while some part of you still listens, still wonders, still quietly witnesses the softening of consciousness. Sleep well, dream gently, and thank you for wandering through the quiet with me. Good night.